Welcome, brave travelers of history, to a tale carved in fire, ambition, and destiny. Today, you embark on a journey into the heart of the First Crusade, where one man's courage, cunning, and gamble would shape the fate of empires. This is the story of Bohemond of Taranto, a warrior whose shadow stretched across both Christendom and the Islamic world, a man both feared and admired, whose very name carried the weight of conquest. In this video, we shall dive deep into the battlefield of faith and politics, where steel clashed with steel, and where every decision meant life or death for thousands. You are not just an observer. You are a companion in this odyssey. You will march alongside Bohemond through desolate plains, storm ancient walls, and witness oaths sworn under torchlight. Prepare yourself for 40 chapters of unyielding drama, relentless ambition, and the gamble of a man who would not be bound by destiny, but dared to forge it with his own hands. So sit back, watch closely, and let the echoes of the past carry you into one of history's most daring sagas, Bohemond's gamble. Rita, imagine standing before the mighty walls of Antioch, starving, exhausted, your companions dropping dead beside you. The ground shakes with the march of enemies, and the sky darkens with despair. Yet one man, Bohemond, smiles, not from madness, but from certainty. For he holds a secret that will turn certain death into eternal glory. This is not just history. This is the gamble that could change the world. Subscribe for more history. Like and comment if you believe history should never be forgotten, and share to spark conversation about the lessons we must learn from the past. This is not myth, this is history. And it begins here. The sun bled across the hills of Apulia, turning the fields to bronze. Among the Norman fortresses that dotted southern Italy, one rose above the rest, Melfi, stronghold of Robert Guiscard, the Iron Duke. Within its stone walls, a boy of unusual size and bearing grew into a man, whose very presence unsettled the halls. His name was Bohemond, christened Mark, but his father nicknamed him after a mythical giant. Bohemond towered above his peers, his frame long-limbed and broad-shouldered, his gait a predator's, yet his inheritance was slim. Robert favored other sons. Bohemond's mother, a Lombard noblewoman, lacked the influence to elevate her child. The boy learned quickly that muscle alone would not win him a crown. He sharpened his wit alongside his sword, watching court intrigues like a hawk. In the training yards, his size brought victory. In the council halls, his words brought silence. Bohemond became a man who knew how to bend without breaking, when to bide time and when to strike. Yet envy grew, brothers whispered. Lords eyed him warily, knowing giants drew both awe and arrows. Bohemond studied his father's campaigns in Greece and the Adriatic, and vowed his destiny lay not in Apulia's narrow valleys, but beyond seas and mountains, where ambition might carve kingdoms. On nights when the torches guttered, he looked eastward. Byzantium gleamed in his mind, a city of marble and gold, and beyond it, rumors of lands richer than Apulia could dream. If fortune denied him by birthright, he would seize it by conquest. Thus, the giant of Apulia set his heart upon a gamble that would one day shake the world. Snow crusted the ground when word spread like wildfire. At Clermont, Pope Urban II had preached a sermon that shook Christendom. He called for a holy war to reclaim Jerusalem from the infidel, promising remission of sins to any who took the cross. In Apulia, Bohemond listened to wandering monks retell the Pope's words. "Deus vult," they cried. "God wills it!" But in Bohemond's chest, a different fire burned. For others, the crusade was salvation. For him, it was opportunity. At a council in Bari, knights debated whether to march. Some muttered of hardships, others dreamed of heavenly crowns. Bohemond sat silent, letting their voices weave the tapestry of doubt and zeal. Finally, he stood. His height silenced the room. If Christendom marches, I march. If gold and land are to be won, I shall not lag behind. And if God grants me glory, then let the bards sing until the end of time. The Normans roared their approval. Many had followed his father into battle and now saw in Bohemond the same flame. But with sharper wit, he sold land to fund his expedition, raising coin for supplies and men. Yet in his chambers that night, staring into a single candle's flame, he admitted the truth to himself. This was not a pilgrimage. This was his chance to seize a throne of his own. The trumpet of Clermont had sounded, and Bohemond would answer, but on his own terms, Bohemond's inheritance. Disputes sharpened the knife of rivalry. His younger half-brother Roger Borsa, favoured by Robert Guiscard's will, sat in Apulia as duke. Bohemond, dispossessed, had tasted betrayal too bitter to forget. When rumors reached him that Roger questioned his loyalty, Bohemond laughed coldly. Loyalty to what? To a father who gave me nothing? To a brother who thinks he wears a crown fit for giants? Some knights deserted Roger, flocking to Bohemond's banner. Others stayed, feeding the feud. Blood was nearly drawn when they met at the ford of the Taranto River. But Bohemond turned his horse aside. No, he said, I will not waste strength on squabbling. Let Roger rot in Italy. My throne lies elsewhere. That decision shocked many. In a land where kin killed kin, Bohemond walked away, carrying with him only the men whose loyalty burned brighter than blood. Their oath was simple, to follow him eastward, wherever his gamble led. On the eve of departure, he stood before them in torchlight. I cannot promise safety. I cannot promise wealth, but I promise you glory. And if God wills it a kingdom, they swore. Blood was mingled in cups, drunk like fire. Bohemond smiled, for at last he commanded not just men, but destiny. At Bari and Brindisi, harbours filled with clamour. Ships rocked, sails snapped in the Adriatic wind. Merchants shouted, priests blessed, soldiers sharpened blades. Bohemond rode among them on a great warhorse, banners of red and black whipping overhead. He sold estates, mortgaged futures, and emptied coffers to outfit this fleet. Every plank of wood, every nail, was a gamble. Yet his presence turned chaos into order. He inspected armor, weighed swords, and laughed with veterans. To the hungry mercenaries he promised spoils. To the pious he spoke of Jerusalem. To his closest companions, Tancred, his nephew, he spoke of crowns. One night Tancred found him staring at the horizon. Uncle, do you dream of heaven or earth? Bohemond smirked. Both. Why choose? When the fleet pushed off, thousands watched from the shore. Mothers wept, priests crossed themselves, and soldiers roared. Bohemond raised his sword, sunlight blazing from the steel, and the host thundered. Deus vult. The standards streamed behind him as the ships sailed. Apulia shrank to a line on the horizon, and with it, the last ties to the land that denied him. Ahead lay the east, where fortune favored the daring. The Adriatic lay restless, its surface black glass under moonlight. The fleet groaned as waves pounded. Soldiers who had never left Italy vomited into the sea, clutching railings. Horses whinnied in fear, penned below decks. Bohemond strode the decks like a god of storms. Salt spray lashed his face. His cloak snapped like a sail. He gripped the mast, laughing as the timbers creaked. If a man fears water, how can he master land? He roared. The crew, steadied by his defiance, fought harder against the waves. Days turned to weeks. Food spoiled. Sailors muttered omens. But Bohemond seized hardship as a weapon. He ordered men to take shifts, rowing, forcing even knights to labor beside peasants. Steel rusts if it does not sweat, he told them. His authority bound them tighter than ropes. At last, on a grey dawn, Constantinople's domes shimmered on the horizon. Marble, gold, and spires pierced the mist. Many fell to their knees in awe. Bohemond only narrowed his eyes. "Beautiful," he murmured. "But beauty is weakness. If a giant knows where to press." The sea had tested his men, and he had found them stronger. Now another test awaited. One of guile, not waves. The Bosphorus shimmered like a silver blade beneath the morning sun. On its far bank, Constantinople rose in layers of impossible splendor, gilded domes, marble palaces, and walls that seemed to scrape the heavens. To Bohemond's hardened Normans, veterans of Apulia and the Adriatic, the city was a vision from another world, yet behind the awe lay suspicion. This was the seat of Alexios Komnenos, Emperor of Byzantium, polished, perfumed, and deadly in ways steel could not match. For Bohemond, this was not a city but a board of chess, and every spire was a piece waiting to move. The emperor welcomed the Crusaders with wary hospitality, feasts laid out in golden halls. Byzantine courtiers whispered like serpents in silken robes. Alexios demanded oaths. All lands reclaimed from the Turks must return to Byzantium. Bohemond bowed, lips grazing relics, but his eyes betrayed nothing. He had seen Alexios's brilliance in his father's failed Greek campaigns. He knew this emperor was no fool. Still, he told himself, an oath is but a weapon. Its edge is sharpest when hidden. That night, as the Crusaders feasted, Bohemond walked alone along the walls, staring east. The Queen of Cities had dazzled him, but also confirmed his ambition. If such wonders existed in the East, then what kingdom might he carve for himself? The oath was sealed, fragile as porcelain, beautiful, binding, and breakable. Bohemond kissed the relics, swore fealty to Alexios, and rose with a half-smile. Around him, princes muttered. Raymond of Toulouse spat, Godfrey frowned, but Bohemond bowed lower, masking contempt with courtesy. In private, he drew Tancred aside. "We swear to give back what we conquer, but tell me, what if Byzantium cannot hold what we return?" Tancred's eyes gleamed. "Then we keep it." Uncle Bohemond's smile widened. The emperor provided guides and supplies, but with watchful eyes. Byzantine officers marked every step, gauging crusader strength. Bohemond played along, sharing jokes, feigning warmth, while memorizing weaknesses. "This is not alliance," he told Tancred. "It is a wager. Alexios wagers that we will bleed for his empire. I wager that in bleeding, I will buy a crown." The pact was porcelain indeed, fragile, beautiful, and doomed to shatter when struck. And Bohemond intended to be the hammer. The Crusaders marched east through Anatolia, dust rising like smoke beneath tens of thousands of boots. Bohemond rode among them, studying leaders as keenly as he studied terrain. Raymond of Toulouse thundered like a lion, too proud to bend. Godfrey of Bouillon was steel, unyielding, blunt, but dependable. Bishop Adhemar of Lapuy wielded faith like a sword, blessing men and calming quarrels. Bohemond marked each strength, each flaw, and shaped his own strategy. Ahead lay Nicaea, jewel of the Seljuk Turks. Its walls glared down like teeth bristling with towers. Kilij Arslan had fled, leaving the city defended but not abandoned. The Crusaders ringed it in siege, tents sprouting like a new forest. Bohemond pressed his scouts close, studying gates, counting patrols. "Not by brute force," he murmured. "By guile Nicaea will fall." He began whispering ideas, planting seeds among leaders, block the lake, cut supply lines, play patience against hunger. But Alexios outplayed them all. Byzantine boats sailed across the hidden lake, striking a secret bargain. When Nicaea surrendered, it was to the emperor's men, not to the Crusaders. The princes raged. Bohemond alone smiled thinly. "A lesson," he said. "This emperor plays long games." "Very well. So do I." Nicaea's towers glared down as if mocking. Arrows rained, bouncing off shields, piercing careless men. Sieged towers crawled forward, set aflame by Greek fire. The crusaders cursed, bled, and endured. Bohemond directed skirmishes with icy calm. "Test every gate," he ordered. "Probe for weakness." His scouts slipped through shadows, counting sentries, mapping walls. While Raymond fumed and Godfrey battered walls, Bohemond sought patterns. "Every fortress has a hidden hinge," he told Tancred. "Find the hinge and the gate swings wide." Yet again Alexios intervened. Byzantine emissaries slipped into the city by night, promising mercy in exchange for surrender. When dawn broke, Nicaea's banners fell, not to crusaders, but to Byzantium. Fury swept the camp. Men spat, cursed the Greeks, even threatened rebellion. Bohemond raised a hand, silencing his troops. "Patience. Let the emperor think he has stolen the prize. One day he will find we have taken something greater." In Bohemond's heart, resentment hardened into resolve. The game between him and Alexios was no longer partnership, it was rivalry. And rivalry would end in crowns or ruin. The road east narrowed into valleys and ridges. At dawn, Turkish horsemen descended like hawks. Arrows screamed from the sky, striking armor, flesh, and earth. The Crusader vanguard reeled. Bohemond, riding point, reacted instantly. He drew his men into a defensive circle, shields locked, lances bristling. Horses screamed, blood sprayed, dust boiled. Tancred, sword flashing, shouted for cohesion. "Hold!" Bohemond roared, voice carrying above the din. "Not one man breaks." He rode the perimeter, intercepting panic, cutting down Turks who ventured too close. Every moment bought time. For hours they endured, surrounded, starving for relief. Bohemond ordered women and children into the center of the circle, soldiers forming iron around them. Arrows thudded like hail. Men fell, gaps closed, shields raised. At last, horns blared. Godfrey and Raymond charged from the west, heavy cavalry breaking into Turkish lines. The ambush turned into rout. Turkish horsemen scattered, leaving the ground littered with broken bows and bodies. Bohemond lowered his sword, sweat and blood dripping. "Remember this day," he told his men. "When death closed its hand around us, we broke its fingers." From that hour, even his rivals whispered respect. Bohemond had proven not only cunning, but iron courage. Anatolia stretched like a kiln, white-hot, under a pitiless sky. Dust rose to the rhythm of marching feet, settling in armor joints and throats, turning every swallow into sand. The road east wound through scrub and broken hills, where the wind smelled of thyme and carrion. Men learned to drink their water slowly and to keep their eyes. Lot, low when the sun flared off distant rocks, too often a mirage, sometimes a watcher. Bohemond made the march into discipline. At dawn the horn called, tents down. Ranks formed, baggage in the center, scouts fanning like knife points. He rode the line, not merely giving orders but explaining them. Why the slow pace saved horses, why the baggage must never lag, why every man carried a measure of grain against surprise. Resentment turned to respect, as his choices paid out in survival. Turkish riders probed the column, a ripple of hooves, the hiss of arrows, laughter carried on the wind. Bohemond refused to be bait. "Shields up, no chase," he barked. When squads begged to pursue, he shook his head. "They want our sweat. Deny it." The army became a hedgehog that moved. At noon the priests raised relics and blessed blistered feet. Bishop Adamar's voice steadied quarrels. Godfrey enforced order with the blunt certainty of iron. Raymond grumbled at delays. Tancred learned to read distances, to count heartbeats between arrow flights, to judge an unseen archer by the angle of dust behind a rock. One afternoon, a train of pack mules staggered in, led by frightened Greeks from a hill village. Their eyes widened at the sight of the Crusader host. Their hands trembled as they offered cheese and sour wine. Bohemond paid, and more than fair. "Let them say we purchase what we can," he said, loud enough for the army to hear, "and take only what we must." Raiding could feed a day. Reputation could open 100 gates. Night in Anatolia fell like a lid. Fires were banked, tents low, sentries doubled. Bohemond ate with his captains on a carpet of thorn and dust. "This land forges men," he said, holding bread in his scarred fingers. "Not by glory, but by grit. Those who endure will be ready when the walls begin." He looked east where stars trembled over black hills. He did not yet see Antioch, but in the furnace glow of the horizon, he felt its shape, towers like teeth, a river like a noose, gates that would open only to patience. The men slept with arrows in their dreams. Bohemond lay awake, measuring the distance between suffering and victory, and finding it bearable. The message first arrived on wings. At sunrise, a falcon stooped into camp, bells tinkling, jesses fluttering. The bird struck the glove of a grim Armenian handler who bowed and offered a leather tube. A leather tube! Bohemond slit it with his dagger. Within lay a strip of parchment, cramped Greek letters, a hurried Latin gloss. Antioch, great city, triple walls, iron chains across the river, garrison strong, supplies strained. A knife requires a narrow place. Before the council, he read only part of it. "Antioch lies ahead," he announced. "A fortress like a mountain, guarding the road to Syria. The river Orontes is chained. The bridges choke like a fist." He let the words breathe, watching faces. Godfrey's jaw hardened. Raymond's lips thinned with a longing not yet named. Adhemar bowed his head, as if in prayer. "Chains on water," Tancred mused later, tracing the letter marks with a finger. "So they expect sieges," Bohemond nodded. "They expect rams and towers. They do not expect patience, nor treachery." The handler brought more. Talk of towers with Armenian guards, of night watches that grew lazy in hunger, of merchants who crossed themselves when asked about the iron bridge. Bohemond paid in silver and protection, letting word spread that the Normans honored those who helped them. The falcon, proud and indifferent, ruffled its feathers and stared at the men with amber contempt. It had delivered messages between lords for years. It would do so again, fed by meat and mystery. By evening, the council debated routes. "Strike quickly," urged some. "The longer we wait, the more the Turks gather." Others counseled caution, remembering Dorylium's near ruin. Bohemond listened, weighing not only tactics, but tempers. "We will not batter stone with flesh," he said at last. "We will arrive as an anvil, not a spear. Let the city throw itself upon us and dull itself." After the council, he stood outside the tent while the falconer fed the bird with a strip of rabbit. The creature's beak worked cleanly, efficiently. "A good messenger," Bohemond murmured. The Armenian smiled, lines deepening around his eyes. "Good, my lord, but birds have no loyalty, only habits." Bohemond's smile in return was quick and sharp. "Show, men too?" He held the parchment to the lamplight once more. Reading the last line, unseen by others, "A guard at the western wall knows hunger and fear of his commander. His name is whispered among merchants." A name had been scratched out, then written again, as if the writer feared the letters. Bohemond folded the strip and tucked it into his belt. The falcon turned its bright eye to him and blinked. "Keep your bird ready," Bohemond told the handler. "I think we will be speaking to Antioch in whispers before we speak in steel. Titikios arrived with polite smiles and a soldier's eyes. The emperor's man wore silk over mail, a curved mustache, and the careful courtesy of a man who'd survived court storms. He brought guides and maps, Byzantine engineers, and the emperor's expectations. The oath, Titikios said, tapping a scroll case, binds us to restore what we take. Bohemond inclined his head. We have not forgotten. In his mind, the porcelain pact gleamed, hairline cracks already crawling across its surface. Hakes. The road narrowed into scrub and ravines. Messages from the east spoke of shifting alliances, of emirs jealous of one another, of supply lines thin as twine. Titikios warned that patience, not bravado, would win Antioch. "You will need us for grain and siegecraft," he said. "We will need you for courage." Bohemond answered with a smile that did not rise to his eyes. "Then let us both be necessary." Rumors budded and bloomed. Some said Titikios wrote nightly to Alexios, urging him to hold back aid until the Latins bled. Others swore Titikios meant to defect if the Turks offered him gold. Bohemond did not start the whispers. He did not have to. He simply let them find water and light. One morning, Titikios was gone. His tent stood with ropes loose, the brazier ash-cold. His officers swore he had ridden to meet a supply convoy. After receiving alarming news, to many crusaders it looked like flight. Panic seethed in alleys between tents. "The Greeks abandon us," men said. "They will claim our victories and leave us our graves." Bohemond addressed the camp before the day's march. "If Titikios departed, it is because the emperor feared to risk him," he proclaimed, voice high and calm. "So be it. We need no nurse to hold our hand. Our road is our own." The words poured oil on waters, but also branded a memory. When the game turned deadly, Byzantium had stepped aside. Privately, Bohemond told Tancred, "This is opportunity. With the Greek gone, whose plan will lead the army?" Tancred grinned like a young wolf. "Yours." Bohemond nodded once. "And when the city falls, whose claim will sound most reasonable?" Tancred's answer was a whisper. "The man without a Greek to own it." The knife's edge gleamed, the risk of standing alone, the promise of unshared glory. Bohemond did not fear edges. He had been walking them all his life. They saw it first as a ridgeline that refused to move, then as walls that climbed the sky. Antioch rose from the plain like a mountain of masonry, triple rings of stone, towers pricking heaven. A citadel anchored to the heights. The Orontes coiled at its feet, bridged and chained, glittering like a drawn blade. Even veterans fell silent. Bohemond reined in on a low hill and let the city fill his pupils. He counted towers, watched patrol rhythms, noted where smoke rose thin and straight from kitchens, less fuel, less food. He traced with a gloved finger the pattern of gates, the St. Paul Gate toward the north, the Dog Gate by the river, the Iron Gate like a clenched tooth. "Not by battering," he murmured. "By turning keys we cannot yet see." He ordered the encampments placed to bite every road. "Do not crowd the walls," he told captains. "Let the city breathe fear." Scouts tested the river chain, found it tight as a boast. Siege timber was scarce. The hills gave scrub, but not forests. "They starve too," Tancred said, watching a thin column of smoke. Bohemond nodded. "Then we must starve slower." A merchant caravan tried to slip from the south gate at dusk. Norman riders netted it like fish. Bohemond spared the men, paid for the goods, then sent them back with a message. Any who traded fairly would live. Any who smuggled weapons would hang. He wanted tales about him in the city that painted him. Not only as a wolf, but as a wolf who kept bargains. He studied the citadel. "That is the hinge," he said to Tancred. If we take the lower city and not the height, the serpent keeps its head. We must plan as if victory comes in parts. That night the camp buzzed with new energy. The fear that follows awe. Priests sang, torches strobed the slopes. From the walls, watch fires blinked in slow exchanges. Keep to tower, tower to gate. Bohemond lay on his cloak, eyes half-lidded, listening to the city breathe. A dog's bark on stone, a cart rattling in an alley, a shout clipped short. He could almost feel the pattern of guards moving like pieces in a game. Only he and Antioch understood. "Sleep," Tancred said at last. Bohemond smiled. "I am." He was not. He was counting. He would count until the numbers became a path. Cold came early and stayed. Frost webbed the tent ropes at dawn. Breath smoked from nostrils like horses in a charge. The siege tightened, then tightened again, until it felt like a belt one notch too far. Men began to count meals, not by days, but by spoons. Bohemond rationed with a surgeon's calm, barley measured by the fist, wine watered until it was a memory. He organized foraging parties by lot, so no company starved alone. "We burn hunger evenly," he told his officers. "No man will believe we have forgotten him." When merchants slipped through with sacks of grain, Bohemond purchased publicly and paid fairly, then quietly bought more for less. Both rumor and food working on his side. Raids came and went like breaths. Tancred led small bands to seize sheep in the hills and return without banners, ghost silent. Once they caught a patrol asleep in a ruined watchpost. Tancred ordered no chase, only their food. "We fight the city," he told the men, "not shadows." Bohemond praised him in front of rival lords and privately corrected a misjudged route. Hunger schooling pride, pride sharpening skill. Inside Antioch, signs of want spoke louder than spies, weaker torches, fewer dogs barking at night. Funeral keening carried by wind, Bohemond walked the pickets, cloak pulled tight, pausing to share a crust with a sentry, and a joke with a boy who had not grown a beard. "We will remember this winter," he said softly, "because it will make the spring impossible to forget." Rumors crept through the lines. A guard along the western wall who cursed his captain, a merchant's nephew who knew a tower key, an Armenian name that slipped from one mouth to another like a warmed coin. Bohemond did not pounce. He cultivated. He had Tancred find the men who could be trusted to listen without boasting, to speak without being heard. The conspiracy grew as a fire grows in damp wood, invisibly, then all at once. Yet despair stalked the camp. A child died near the cook fires. A veteran threw down his spear and wept into his hands. Bohemond stood in the cold and let the grief pass through him. He did not offer lies. "We are starving," he told them at a muster called under a pale noon sun. "So are they. We have purpose. Many behind those walls do not. The first to blink will lose, and I do not intend to blink." The men roared. Not joy, but defiance. It was enough. That night, Bohemond finally allowed himself a thin bowl of stew. He lifted it to his lips, then paused, listening. The wind brought a faint sound, a gate hinge somewhere in the city, long unused, squealing. He smiled into the steam. "Soon," he whispered. The name came like a spark carried on winter wind. Firuz, an Armenian in Turkish service, keeper of a tower on the western wall, a man whose captain mocked him, whose purse stayed light while his children grew thin. The rumor circled the camp until it found Bohemond's ear, and then it stopped because Bohemond cupped it in both hands. He arranged the meeting where stone swallowed sound, the ruins of a bathhouse, its mosaic floor broken into stars. Tancred guided a hooded merchant to the place. The man shrank at every torch, every footfall. Bohemond waited without impatience, a shadow in a wolf-fur mantle, a single lamp between them like a small truth. "My lord," whispered the go-between, "he can give you a gate, a ladder, a watch that sleeps." Bohemond asked for more than promises. He asked for the name of the tower, the count of steps, the pattern of reliefs, the thickness of the crossbeam over the inner door. He asked how many men would turn a key, and how many would turn a blind eye. When the answers came, Bohemond laid out two futures. "In the first," he said softly, placing a purse of silver on the broken mosaic, "you and yours vanish into the night, under my protection, with coin enough to begin again." He opened his other palm. "In the second, you are found out. Your captain's rope is quick. The citadel's stones are colder than you imagine." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Firuz did not come in person, but the message that returned, scratched on a strip of cloth, carried by the same merchant, was written by a man who had chosen. There would be a signal. 2 hooded lanterns placed behind the crenels at the second hour, then darkness. Then a third lantern, wavering like a star. The tower guards would be thin that night. The rope ladder would find its hooks ready. Bohemond burned the cloth and memorized the hour. He told no counsel, shared no triumph. He parceled knowledge like grain. Tancred would choose the climbers. A Saxon named Wolf would carry the light grapnels. A silent Burgundian would cut throats as if sewing. The rest of the army would hear a different plan entirely. Raids to the north, noise at the dog gate, drums in the ravines. He walked the pickets before dawn and felt the city's stillness like a held breath. In the east, the sky bruised. "Let it be tonight," Tancred breathed. Bohemond nodded once, a motion like a blade being tested. "Tonight, then. Let the tower learn. Who owns the ladder? News breeds enemies as quickly as friends." Whispers of a way enswirled. Despite Bohemond's care, carried by men who could not help standing too close to fire. Raymond of Toulouse sent for him beneath a sagging awning glazed with frost. Godfrey stood there too, iron still, Adhemar with hands folded like a shuttered chapel. "You work secrets," Raymond said, voice measured. "You endanger the host." Bohemond met his eye and saw pride fatigue, the ache of a man who wanted glory clean and bright. "I work outcomes," Bohemond replied. Secrets are the price of them." Adhemar pressed for unity, for oaths renewed in a common tent, for a timetable and shared command. Bohemond listened and granted what cost him little. "At dawn," he said aloud, "I will lead a diversion at the northern trench. Let the banners of Toulouse and Bouillon fly there with mine." Godfrey nodded, satisfied with steel over smoke. Raymond frowned, unconvinced but bound by the bishop's plea. The real timetable lived elsewhere. Tancred's chosen men oiled their mail and wrapped cloth around buckles to kill their clink. A dozen climbers sat with heads bowed, breathing slow, their hands open on their knees as if in prayer. Wolves sharpened hooks until they whispered on stone. A near betrayal almost cracked the plan. A Norman sergeant, drunk on nameless rumor, boasted to a Provençal scout that the walls are softer than they look. The scout carried it to his lord, the lord to Raymond. Bohemond moved before the drift became a storm. He found the sergeant, stripped him to his shirt in the frost, and spoke so every nearby fire could hear. Loose tongues feed graves. He spared the man, but posted him at the very front of the diversion line, where fear would keep him quiet. Mercy made sharper by That night, Bohemond walked to the edge of camp, stopped where the ground dipped, and the wall seemed close enough to touch. He held the siege in his mind like a map lit by pinpricks. The decoy drums, the bishop's prayers, Raymond's banners, Godfrey's reserve, the dark ladder beneath Firuz's tower. The pieces did not love one another. They did not need to. They needed only to move when bid. He returned to the council tent and spoke softly. At dawn, noise. At midnight, silence, he told Tancred. Between them, the city's heartbeat will change. Tancred grinned. You young, dangerous, loyal. We'll make it miss a beat, the moon hid. Clouds drew a veil over the walls, and the city breathed in its sleep. At the second hour, 2 faint lights winked on behind the battlements. They died. A third flickered like a hesitant star. Firuz had spoken. Bohemond stood with the climbers at the base of a shallow ravine. He said no prayer. He put a hand to Tancred's shoulder and felt the wiry strength, the bridle-tight control. If you fall, he murmured, you fall forward. Tancred nodded once, then slid into shadow with the first ladder. Hooks hissed, kissed stone bit. The rope strained. A Saxon's arms bunched as he fed the ladder up, rung by rung, until it caught on a crenel. And Tancred went first. Gloved hands, soft boots, a breath held until the next rung. Below, men leaned in, eyes upward, each a held thread. At the top, a silhouette moved. The Burgundian ghost flowed over the lip and became a dot, arm that closed a mouth, and a knife that opened a throat. No cry, only the soft mistake of a boot against stone. 2 more men followed. Then Tancred rolled onto the platform and pressed himself flat, while a drowsy guard turned and yawned. The guard never finished. The gatehouse mechanism groaned like an old man when its peg was pulled. Inside, Firuz's shaking hands did their work. A chain slipped. A bar eased. The inner door creaked with the insolence of wood that had not been moved in months. Bohemond's eyes never left the black slit that led into the city. He raised a hand, he let it fall. Bohemond climbed last of the first company, big frame moving, with a care that denied its size. On the wall, he found Tancred with a smear of black on his cheek and light in his eyes. "Open it," Bohemond said. Tancred hauled the last bar. The gate mouth yawned, they poured through. Alleyways cramped around them, walls sweating cold. A butcher's stall, a shrine, a sleeping dog that woke and then did not. Knots of defenders, half-armed, stumbled into the dance and were cut apart. Somewhere, a woman began to scream, and then hid her scream in her hands. The army outside felt the draw and rushed the opening. Hooves struck cobble, shields banged doorways. From a tower above, a horn finally found its voice and sent it down like a spear. "Too late," Bohemond said, and drove the spear forward himself. Dawn found the lower city in crusader hands, and the heights spitting defiance. The citadel, a claw of stone on the mountain's shoulder, kept its garrison and its courage. From its towers, Turkish archers sent black rain. From its gate, sudden sorties dashed down to cut at the new occupiers and spring away again. The serpent's head lived. Bohemond made the streets into a machine. Barricades sprouted from wagons and doors ripped from hinges. Lanes were bent with timbers to break a cavalry rush. Kill zones were plotted and named. He posted crossbowmen in upper windows, set signal horns at corners, and told the men that any who chased the citadel's taunts would now sleep outside the walls that night, if they slept at all. The princes gathered among toppled statues, faces gray with triumph confused by danger. Raymond demanded the city be held in common under oath to the emperor. Godfrey argued for shared rule until Jerusalem was won. Bohemond listened, then stepped forward with his gamble laid plain. "I opened the gate," he said quietly, "with my plan, my men, my risk. I will hold Antioch. If the citadel is tamed and the relief broken, none of you will regret it. If I fail, I will yield my claim." It was both audacity and clarity, the only coin the hungry accept. Murmurs spread. Some balked, More nodded. Admar, seeing disorder otherwise, raised his hand. "Let necessity decide," he intoned. Let him who can keep Bohemond did not wait for parchment. He visited each barricade. He shared watered wine with men, whose hands shook with exhaustion. He placed Tancred over the northern quarter and a Flemish captain over the riverside, and told them both, "Hold like a door, with your back against it." He sent messengers to call in stragglers, to strip the suburbs of anything that could burn under an enemy torch. Twice that day the citadel lunged. The first time it met bolts and a wall of spears. The second time it broke a barricade before a Norman countercharge, slammed it shut again. The third time never came. The garrison had learned the cost of teeth. Tooth. In the evening, as light bled from the stone like old wine, Bohemond climbed to a roofline that stared at the citadel. He stood there while arrows ticked against parapet and listened to the city. He half owned the creak of seized gates, the lowing of terrified cattle, prayers in a handful of tongues, the slap of a surgeon's cloth. He felt the weight of what he had taken, and the weight that was coming to take it back. Kerboga, Tancred said from the stair, as if the name itself could be seen in the far dust. Bohemond did not turn. "Let him come," he said. "He will find a city with my name on it, and a price he cannot afford." First came the rumors, moving faster than hoofbeats. The Emir of Mosul was marching with lords and banners, enough to darken the plain. Then came the smoke, thin lines at the horizon where scouts burned their own campfires to speak the shape of an army. Finally came the sound, a pressure on the air like thunder very far away. Bohemond sent riders to the iron bridge and farther, to where the Orontes ran slow through reeds. They returned with dust on their tongues and fear kept behind their teeth. "Many," they said. "Tents like a market." Drums, standards from Aleppo, Homs, Haran. They laugh at our hunger. Bohemond did not laugh. He turned the city inward. Walls that had menaced became shields. He assigned watches by hourglass, not sun, so fatigue would not take a gate by surprise. He built fires behind likely breach points to blind night attackers, and taught green dot men how to stand in a doorway, so two could fight as six. He rationed again, harder, the belt notches gone. He cut away anything that was not a weapon or food or the breath to use them. Panic prowled. Some wanted to flee south, to abandon Antioch to its rightful owners, and save their pilgrimage for another day. "If you run," Bohemond told a wavering handful, "you will carry this fear with you, and it will ask for food at every gate." He pointed at the streets they held. "Here, at least, you know the cost." He did not threaten. He priced. The first banners of Kerboga's vanguard appeared like new towers sprouting on the plain. Their horsemen rode close enough to taunt, and then away again. Arrows lofted like insults. At night, drums beat in strange rhythms. Voices rose in chants. Fires multiplied until the stars had rivals. The besiegers were besieged. Bohemond moved like a metronome in chaos. He toured sentries. He drilled a reserve, whose only task was to plug whatever hole the dawn opened. He sent skirmishers to cut pickets, to steal horses, to make the enemy sleep 1 hour less than they wished. He forbade duels, forbade heroics, forbade anything that wasted men on a story. The story would be written later, or not at all. On the third night, a red moon bled across the sky, and a murmur went through the city like a shiver. Adhemar blessed the walls, and the men who stood upon them. Raymond looked south with a hunger that was not only for food. Godfrey checked straps and bolts and said nothing. Tancred stood beside Bohemond on a gatehouse roof and tried to count the fires beyond the dark. "Do we have enough?" the young man asked. Bohemond watched the enemy lines swell and contract like a living thing, and answered without drama. "We have exactly what we hold." He put a hand on Tancred's shoulder and squeezed once. "And we will teach them the price." The rumour walked before dawn in bare feet. A Provençal visionary named Peter Bartholomew claimed St. Andrew had visited him in a fever and shown him where the Holy Lance lay buried beneath the floor of St. Peter's Church. Men starved for signs as much as for bread. The story leapt from mouth to mouth until it reached Bohemond. Like a spark carried in winter wind, he found Bishop Adhemar already in the dim nave, candles smoking, dust floating like ash. The stone flags were cold underfoot. The saints in the mosaics kept their counsel. Peter trembled as he spoke, his voice a thin wire pulled too tight. "Dig here," he whispered, pointing near the altar. "Here, where the ground remembers blood." Bohemond watched Adhemar's face as much as he listened to Peter's words. "At the Bomec." The bishop's eyes were tired but careful. A shepherd wary of wolves and miracles alike. "If God wills it, he will show it," Adhemar murmured, and made the sign that called courage. Even when it did not call rain, they dug, knights and peasants together, fingers, knives, a mattock borrowed from a carpenter whose hands shook from hunger. The floor yielded grudgingly. Hours crawled. The nave breathed with the sound of shovels, and prayers surrendered to rhythmic grunts. Some men began to sob from fatigue, others cursed under their breath, and then repented. At last, Peter cried out and flung himself into the pit. Stones scraped, iron sang against iron, and he rose with a length of corroded spearhead, cradled like a newborn. A gasp became a tide. Men knelt as if a wind pressed them down. Even Adhemar bowed his head and let the moment pass over him like a wave. Bohemond took the relic in both hands. Rust stained his palms. Weight settled in his mind. A sign, they would call it. He turned so the light fell on the pitted iron and spoke for the army and for history. God has not forgotten those who did not forget him. He lifted it higher. "Tomorrow we march out." Later, alone with Tancred, he did not pretend certainty. "Whether heaven buried this or men," he said, "its edge cuts the same, if it gives us courage." He ordered the smiths to mount the fragment in a reliquary socket and lash it to a standard. Let belief have a banner, let fear see it coming. That night, barefoot processions coiled through the streets like rivers of candlelight. The lance led, the hungry followed, mouths shaping psalms that tasted of steel. Bohemond watched from a shadowed doorway, his face unreadable. Faith could be a ladder or a blade. Tomorrow it must be both. Morning brought cold steel and hot breath. Before the great sally, Bohemond set the plane to thinking, the way he needed it to think. He chose the iron bridge, that narrow throat over the Orontes, where traders once bargained and armies now bled. Tancred rode with a light vanguard, 30 lances, 60 crossbows, a handful of archers on shaggy ponies. Bohemond followed with a fist of infantry hidden among olive groves and rubble. The plan was a whisper: sting, draw, break. Let Kerbogas forward, claws swipe at air and strike iron. They reached the bridge as the sun shouldered through haze. The river moved slow beneath, winter fat and indifferent. Across the span rose enemy pickets, horse archers with half-strung bows, scouts who smiled at the sight of so few, and whistled like boys before a prank. Tancred gave them something to laugh at, an eager press, a reckless feint. Arrows rattled, 2 Normans pitched into the current. The rest fell back, shouting fear with artful volume. The Turks followed, laughter widening into speed, hooves ringing the iron deck like hail on a roof. Bohemond's hand opened. Crossbows spoke from scrub, bolts thudded into lamella. The first ranks folded as if they'd tripped on the river. Then the hidden infantry surged, shields like a wall growing teeth. Men grappled on the planks, horses screamed. Someone set a faggot bundle alight, and smoke took the bridge by the throat. "Hold the far lip!" Bohemond roared, voice carrying over water. Tancred and a dozen stayed on the enemy bank, just long enough to nail panic into place, then ripped away, drawing the survivors into a tangle of flight that clogged their own road. Behind them, Crusaders hacked the last timbers from the causeway's edge and tipped burning debris into the stream. By noon, the bridge was a blackened jaw with fewer teeth. The Turks had learned a lesson, calculated in ash and bodies. In the city, word ran quicker than any messenger. The Normans still had claws. Antioch would not drown quietly. Bohemond stood with his boot on a warped beam, watching embers wink and die. "Small victories breed big rumors," he said to Tancred. "Big rumors breed mistakes." Tancred grinned, smoke cutting tears from his eyes. "Then let's feed the plain." They left standards planted like thorns on their bank and pulled back in good order. Their dead counted, their wounded carried. Behind them, the Orontes kept its secrets, and the enemy camp nursed a new respect and a deeper irritation that would cost them more than wood. Junson climbed a pale sky. Barefoot lines wound through Antioch's streets, priests, knights without spurs, peasants with faces scoured thin. At their head, buoyed by hands as much as by faith, the holy lance gleamed dully from its reliquary. Bishop Adhemar's voice rose and fell over the murmur, like a keel on waves. At the gate of St. George, Bohemond waited in full harness. His banner hung heavy, his jaw was set, as if it were another piece of armor. He divided the host into battles. Godfrey on the right, Raymond on the left, Tancred with the light horse to worry. Flanks, and his own corps like a hammer held back, until the nail showed its head. "We walk out as one," he told captains. "We do not chase, we break." Drums from Kaboga's camp answered the church bells with mockery. Dust rose where their ranks formed, emirs with bright standards, horse archers like a rolling sea. They had counted the Crusaders' hunger and found it reassuring. They had not counted their hunger for an ending. The gates groaned open. Procession became battle line. Men kissed the lance as it passed and found their places with eyes that looked farther than the plain. Bohemond rode along the front and let them see him seeing them. "If you cannot eat," he called, "then eat fear." Their fear. The first charges met a storm of arrows. Shields budded quills, gaps appeared and closed. Godfrey's line took the weight and did not crack. Raymond's Provençals came on with a shout that sounded like stubbornness turned into music. Tancred's riders slipped wide, stabbing at horse archers' habit of circling too close to mock. Bohemond waited until the enemy's center pulsed forward, and the coalition's seams showed like stitches tugged too hard. He saw messengers riding between emirs, saw a banner wheel away when pride refused to be spent on another man's plan. He lowered his sword, the hammer fell. His battle crashed into the hinge, where confusion had opened, where arrows had already spent themselves in mockery and were slow to knock again. Steel rang, flesh yielded. Vows made in dark tents broke in daylight. Across the plain, rumors outran truth, that saints on white horses rode with the Latins, that fire walked beside the lance. Bohemond did not bother to look for visions. He watched men decide what they believed and shape the day to match. By midday, the sea that was Kerboga's army had become rivers, then streams, then puddles fleeing toward shadow. The citadel on the hill still spat in defiance, but the plain belonged to the barefoot procession that had become a storm. Bohemond reined in on a rise and took the measure of triumph like a craftsman, checking a blade for balance. "Back," he ordered at last. "We do not drown in our own victory." The gate swallowed the host again. Men wept without shame, laughter breaking like fever, bread appearing as if conjured. The lance returned to its dark church, and Bohemond to his council, where a harder battle waited, not with spears, but with words. Victory lit the city like a fever. And with fever comes argument. In the echoing nave of the cathedral, princes gathered among scorched banners and cracked pillars. The smell of sweat, incense, and ash braided the air. Raymond of Toulouse stood near the altar. With a look that wrestled piety and pride, Godfrey rested calloused hands on the pommel of his sword. Adhemar presided, half judge, half physician. Bohemond spoke first, not loud but clear. We held this city when the world pressed its hand against our throat. We opened its gates. We broke the siege. We bled for these stones. He let a breath fall. Alexios did not come. A murmur. A messenger, dust still in his beard, stepped forward to repeat the tale that had already crept through alleys. The emperor had marched, yes, but turned back at Philomelian on the counsel of Stephen of Blois, who swore the crusade was lost. Betrayal wears many faces. One is caution at the wrong hour. Raymond's reply was iron, wrapped in scripture. Oaths bind us whether or not others' courage fails. The emperor is the rightful lord of these lands. Oh, we swore. Bohemond met his gaze without heat. We swore to a partner who left the table. An oath broken to us, frees the oath from us. Adhemar lifted a hand. If we split, we lose Jerusalem to gain Antioch. If we hold together, we may keep both. He turned to Bohemond. What do you seek? Bohemond did not pretend modesty, custody. Not as thief, but as keeper. Let Antioch stand under my guard. In the name of the crusade, until the road to Jerusalem is won, or until the emperor comes to claim it in arms, not rumors. Godfrey watched the room. He knew a battlefield when he stood on one. Necessity has arguments that parchment cannot answer, he said. The city needs a single hand. Others nodded, some scowled. Raymond proposed a compromise. The city is common property, governed by an appointed council. Bohemond shook his head. Councils feed on time. The citadel does not. The deadlock held until weariness itself voted. Men wanted sleep, not philosophy. Adhemar, seeing drift toward rancor, gave the bishops mercy. That is also a commander's order. Let the man who can hold the city hold it. For now, it was not a coronation. It was consent. Outside, the streets hummed with a different music. Bakers kneading, smiths heating broken mail, children staring at strange shields. On the hill, the citadel still watched, and beyond the plain, roads braided toward Aleppo and Latakia like choices. That night, Bohemond wrote a letter he did not send. To an emperor who had almost been an ally. I would have kept your oath if you had kept your courage, he wrote in his head. Now I keep your city because someone must. He sealed nothing and slept like a man who had earned enemies. Titles are less important than tasks when a city bleeds. Bohemond began to rule before anyone called it ruling. He set watches at every gate and tower, made the night walk as carefully as the day. He reopened markets, with prices fixed for bread and oil, flogging the first speculator publicly and paying the first honest vendor. Double. Let them learn, he told the clerk at his elbow, what kind of wolf they have. He called the elders of the Armenian and Greek quarters to the old governor's hall, and heard them in their own tongues through interpreters, whose loyalty he tested with small lies. He confirmed priests in their churches and judged disputes. At a long table in the courtyard, pooling on cracked marble, a Frank who struck a Syrian woman drunk was fined and shamed. A merchant who hoarded grain lost his store to the bakeries. Justice must be seen if it is to be believed. Walls were patched with plundered timber. Cisterns were scrubbed and sealed. Refuse was hauled beyond the gates, lest plague do what Kerboga could not. He assigned fiefs carefully. A street here, a vineyard there, never enough to let a single lord grow fat, and impossible to dislodge. He rewarded Tancred with the northern quarter. Hard work, hard men, the kind of gift that makes a captain rather than a parasite. Letters went west with ships on the Orontes. Reports wrapped in glory and need. Send masons, send monks, send wives who can bake, and men who can cut stone. He knew stories fill ships as much as prophets do. He salted his dispatches with both. Not all was order. Knives still whispered in alleys. A squad vanished on patrol near the citadel, returned in pieces. Bohemond answered with limits, not rage. He forbade lone excursions. He doubled the crossbow posts that watched the citadel's gate. When a rumor spread that Greek clergy plotted to open a postern to Byzantium, he summoned the patriarch to dinner, seated him high, gifted him a candle of costly wax, and quietly replaced the doors. Hinges the same night. Authority is edge and embrace. Use both or lose both. In the evenings, after judgment and inspection, Bohemond walked the walls. The city's breath had changed. Fewer funeral keens, more hammers, the early swear of a baker cursing a stubborn oven, ordinary music. He paused at a tower where a boy cleaned a mail shirt with sand and oil. "Whose is that?" he asked. "Mine, my lord," the boy said, not looking up, and Bohemond smiled where he could not be seen. He was no prince, not yet, but the city had begun to answer when he spoke, and to anticipate when he did not. Names follow deeds, crowns follow habits. Antioch was learning both. The city breathed again, but not easily. Smoke no longer meant burning roofs, only the mourning ovens. The cries in the streets were market cries instead of mourning. Yet every sound carried a question, south or stay. The princes circled that question like wary dogs. Word of Jerusalem traveled faster than wind. Pilgrims longed to see the sepulchre. Before death found them, knights felt vows tighten like belts. Raymond of Toulouse spoke of the holy city as a beacon. Godfrey listened more than he spoke, gaze turning south. Whenever the cathedral bells finished their song, Bohemond stood above the Orontes and watched barges scrape the quays, measuring grain and timber. The way other men measured glory. The citadel still glared from the hill, contained but unbroken. Raiders pricked the borders. Armenian envoys begged protection from towns that smelled of dust and tax collectors. Antioch was a prize, but also a responsibility with teeth. In council, Raymond's voice filled the hall. God did not raise us to be wardens of a single city. He raised us to free his own. Murmurs swelled. Bohemond waited for quiet, then answered, "Even, certain. Jerusalem will not run away. Armies will, if we march and leave chaos. We hand this victory back to our enemies and to the emperor who did not come." The last line cut. It was meant to. Bishop Adhemar looked thin as a drawn line, illness blotching his cheeks. He tried to stitch the quarrel with scripture and patience. "Let neither zeal nor prudence devour the other," he said, and blessed them with a hand that trembled. No blessing could add hours to his life. The sickness took him soon after, and the camp learned how quiet a city can be when a peacemaker stops speaking. The army divided like water finding two beds. Raymond gathered pilgrims and lords who could not bear delay. Godfrey would join him when provisions allowed. Bohemond walked the departing columns to the southern gate, accepted their blessings, gave them bread from his stores, and made sure they noticed. "Jerusalem needs your courage," he told them. "Antioch needs my stubbornness." When the gate closed, the city's echo changed. There was more work than men to do it. Bohemond rode the walls and felt the shape of his decision in stone under his hand. Unromantic, necessary. We hold, he told Tancred. We pacify the valley, feed the forges, and teach these towers to answer only our signals. Tancred nodded, hungry for the hard work of keeping what others had only conquered. Richard. That night, Bohemond spread 2 maps on a table. One of roads to Jerusalem, one of the Orontes and its tributaries, the routes to Latakia, Aleppo, and the mountain forts. He weighed them with a dagger and a piece of broken chain. Faith has its hour, he said softly, and rule has the rest of the day. He chose the heavier, titles followed deeds, the way shadows follow feet. They took their time. Antioch learned Bohemond's habits and began to answer to them. Markets opened with his bell. Patrols turned when he lifted a finger. Petty thieves cursed his name and then obeyed it. When the day came to make ceremony out of custom, the city acted as if it had been waiting. The square before the old governor's hall filled with tongues. Frankish, Greek, Armenian, Arabic. Priests and imams kept their corners, eyes wary but curious. Tancred set the guard in a ring that looked loose, but wasn't. Overhead, a wind off the mountains snapped fabric against poles. Bohemond arrived without parade, mail, scarlet surcoat, a cloak trimmed not in vanity but in warmth. He climbed a low platform and faced a crowd that was not only his own. A herald read decrees about weights, about taxes, ratcheted down from a strangler's grip to a farmer's due, about the restoring of churches, the repair of baths and cisterns, about penalties for brawling in markets and for knives drawn near shrines. Any shrines. Then came the banner, not a tapestry of saints, not a Byzantine eagle, but a wolfen cross sewn on crimson, the device he had carried from Apulia to this stone nest. By a foreign river, Tancred set the staff in a socket on the wall, and the cloth beat once, twice, then filled like a lung. By the grace of God and the consent of those who would live here under law, the herald said, Bohemond, Prince of Antioch. It was not a shout that answered, but a broken chord. Cheers, mutters, a chant from his Normans, the rough, surprised laughter of men who had not expected to see order shaped so quickly. Bohemond did not bow or preen. He lifted a hand and made promises that were not poetry. No new tax for a year. Grain barges protected on the river. Mixed courts where an Armenian and a Frank would judge together. The citadel kept under watch until it learned the limits of stubborn stone. Envoys from Edessa and Latakia stood in the shade and judged him as customers judge a blade. A Greek priest whispered to a merchant. A Syrian boy tugged a sleeve and asked if princes always look this tired. Bohemond signed charters without flourish. Names of elders, written in several scripts, and handed the documents to men who weighed parchment as if it were gold. At dusk he climbed the tower where the banner licked the wind. The valley lay in folds of copper. Smoke from smithies wrote short, hopeful lines. Prince, Tancred said at his shoulder, a grin he did not try to hide. So the word at last. Bohemond nodded, eyes on the river and the roads. Words follow work. Keep the work. Maps do not show nerves. The parchment said Aleppo to the east, Hama and Homs to the south, Latakia to the sea, valleys and roads as neat lines. In truth, each road was a rumor, each line a contested breath. Bohemond learned the edges by riding them. He moved as a hub moves, not a spoke, sending Tancred north along the Orontes to pinch tolls from bandits who styled themselves lords, dispatching a Flemish captain to the sea road, to quiet the bribes at bridges, inviting Armenian hillmen to carry messages in exchange for stable markets and the right to keep their knives. He wrote to Baldwin at Edessa, trading letters heavy with politeness and lighter with promises, mutual aid against raiders, prisoners ransomed at fixed prices, marriages considered. When the ink between them dried into trust, skirmish replaced siege. A convoy saved here, a raiding party punished there. Once, outside Arta, a column of horse archers tested the new prince's reach. Bohemond did not chase. He feinted them into a dry wadi, boxed both mouths with infantry, and let crossbows write the end of that story. Survivors carried the tale to market stalls. Antioch's wolves no longer hunted, only at night. Not all victories wore steel. Bohemond met merchants in a courtyard smelling of figs and iron, and fixed caravan dues below the level of theft. Bolo, routines, then forbade his own men from gifts at the gates. He reopened a bathhouse and paid the first week's firewood. The city's grumbling softened by degrees that coins could measure. A Greek scribe brought him a list of old customs dues. Bohemond slashed through two, raised one, and balanced the book with a sense for what a town would bear. Diplomacy bit too. A messenger from Aleppo arrived with silks and a smile, suggesting that Antioch keep to its river, and others would keep to theirs. Bohemond smiled back and sent him home with a finer cloak and a poorer opinion of the city's caution. "We are not drawing borders," he told Tancred. "We are drawing habits." The citadel hissed occasionally, a sortie that died on a stake, a night arrow that thudded into a door. Bohemond allowed patience to be seen. "We could storm it," he said, "where the right ears could hear, and spend good blood on stone. We will teach it to starve on obedience." Instead, by season's turn, caravans counted Antioch as a stop. Instead of a hazard, caravan bells replaced warning bells. At least on good days, Bohemond let himself sleep an hour longer once and woke guilty. The map still lay on his table. He had colored nothing in, but the roads had begun to behave as if he had. Steel keeps borders, stories bring armies. Bohemond understood both. He summoned a clerk with a neat hand and a memory like a ledger, and began to throw lines over the sea. "Write to Apulia," he said, pacing. "To every knight who ever envied a brother's field, tell them there is land under a kinder sun if they can hold it." The clerk scratched. "To Provence, use the language of pilgrimage for their wives, and the language of profit for their husbands. To Rome, speak of order where once there was none. To France, praise their courage in the south, and say a prince here would welcome their banners and their bishops." He paused, then added a note for Chartres and Paris, names on his tongue like keys. He meant to use in time. The letters did not only praise. They asked masons, smiths, millers, midwives. "A city is a siege without walls," Bohemond said, smiling crookedly at his own joke. "We must break it carefully." He set terms for fiefs and pay, for garrison service and market rights. He promised less than a liar, more than a miser, and exactly enough for men with hunger, where other men kept hearts. Messengers carried parchment like embers. Bohemond weighed which tales would burn best. He gilded victories without minting lies. The ladder at night, the hammer at noon, the bridge that burned and taught the enemy to respect iron. He described Antioch's baths restored, bread ovens that did not bake stolen grain, mixed courts where a Syrian and a Norman swore over the same table. He included a few names of men who had made small fortunes quickly, true enough to travel, Natheswaros, etc., pointed enough to sting rivals. He also wrote letters he would never show, drafts to men he meant to meet, kings, counts. The emperor's name appeared on one page and was blotted out on the next. "Not yet," he told the clerk, and sealed other packets with wax stamped by a wolf's head. At night he stood by the river where boats nosed the quays. Lanterns made small cities out of their reflections. Words rove faster than oars, Tancred said, joining him. Bohemond's answering grunt was half laugh. Aye, and they sink slower. See that they say what we mean. Weeks later, the first replies came with new sails on the horizon. Cousins' sons with more bravado than coin. Veterans with scars like maps. A baker's family, who could feed a street with a single oven. A mason who ran a hand over Antioch's battered gate and said, "I can make this sing again." Bohemond met them at the dock. Like a host who is also a commander, he signed them to terms and to futures. In a chest in his chamber he kept one letter with its seal unbroken. A message from a court in France. Rumors of a match that might bind steel to silk. He let it sleep. Armies come first. Marriages come when walls are tall. Power goes hunting and finds other hunt. Messages from Melatine arrived like 3 knocks at a door. An Armenian lord pleading for aid against the Danish men Turks, who tightened around his hills like a wire. Bohemond read the letters with a finger, tapping the table. "If we let them eat our friends," he said, "they will dine nearer tomorrow." He marched light, chosen lances, Tancred at his side, guides who knew the dry gullies and goat paths, a promise to return before Antioch missed his weight. The road east felt older than the Crusade, older than the cities, stone tracks worn by empires that had forgotten their own names. Villages opened doors to bread and news, and shut them quickly against the dust. At the river crossings, they found tracks too neat, too many. Bohemond ordered scouts out like thrown knives. They returned with tales of campfires hidden under rock shoulders, of horse lines screened by scrub, of a banner that bore no emir's name but the mark of the Danishman Ghazi, warlord of traps. Bohemond set his column to hedgehog and moved anyway. The land pinched into a wadi with walls like baked clay. "The first arrow didn't kill," it announced. The second took a man from his saddle. The third arrived with drums and hooves, and a voice like laughter. The ambush closed as a net closes, horses screaming, dust a blindfold, riders swirling to cut at the joints. Bohemond's shield guard took the brunt. Tancred slashed a lane and shouted men into it, buying seconds with inches. Form Bohemond roared the word a bridge they ran across. They formed, late, imperfect, good enough for 1 more minute. 2. The Danishmen were quick and clever. They did not batter, they worried. They drove the column, tugged its edges, opened a pocket and filled it with arrows. When a retreat looked possible, the pocket turned into a pit. Bohemond saw the pattern and knew it, a hunter who had taught himself patience. He tried to break the rhythm with a sudden charge at the net's knot. For a heartbeat, the world answered. Men forced a gap. Tancred's horse shouldered through. A standard dipped and rose. Then the far wall of the wadi spat fresh riders and the gap dissolved into noise. The knot moved. The net tightened. "Yield terms," someone shouted in Greek, the accent rough. Bohemond's laugh was a bark. He fought until exhaustion made the sword a door. He could not lift. When they pulled him from the saddle, he was nearly as heavy as the armor that had made him strong. They tied his hands with a competent kindness. Tancred, blood at his hairline, clawed toward him and was dragged back by men who wanted him alive. "Hold Antioch," Bohemond spat, and they gagged him. The captors did not gloat. They had trapped a prince, and princes were ransoms that built fortresses. They led him north and east, away from the roads he had begun to teach obedience. Chains chafed. The sun did its slow work. Bohemond measured time by the taste of water and the habits of his guards. Who prayed when? Who gambled? Who missed home? A captive can still count. Behind him, Antioch learned a new fear, the weight of a missing center. Ahead of him rose an unknown fortress, its walls clean, and aloof. He took its measure with the same eyes that had sized Antioch, and began to plan for years, as if they were knights. The fortress had no name. A man would speak with pride. It was a stack of rock above a dry river, its gate a mouth that swallowed riders and spat silence. Bohemond learned the rhythm of its days, the way a hunter learns a forest, the guard whose step limped on the third stair, the cook who spilled lentils when she laughed, the officer who checked locks twice when clouds gathered. Captivity is a clock. The wise man reads it. They gave him a cell with a slit for a window and a chain he could lift like a weight. He lifted it. Mornings, he stretched against stone until tendons sang. Afternoons, he traced maps in dust. Antioch's quarters, the Orontes bending, the roads that crawled like veins toward Aleppo and Latakia. At night he played a game with pebbles, moving them as if they were men. A gate here, a feint there, a hinge, where surprise becomes law. Guards passing saw a lord hunched over dirt. They did not see the city, being held in a mind that refused to rust. He learned words he had not needed before. A greeting in Turkish for the boy who brought water, a curse in Armenian for the guard who kicked bowls, a prayer muttered by his captor's mother when she tied a charm to her son's wrist. Language opens doors, even when doors are iron. He traded small things for smaller freedoms, a story for an extra cup, a chess. Move for 10 more heartbeats at the window. Not arrogance, not begging, negotiation. A prince without a throne still barters, news filtered through like rain that finds cracks. A caravan driver whispered that Tancred held Antioch with wolf's teeth. A soldier bragged of a raid checked outside Arta, crossbows from windows, traps in alleys. Bohemond filed each word as a smith files burrs from iron. Pride pricked, then warmed. He had chosen his steward well. Seasons turned their same stones, different colors. Summer baked the air until men cursed in low voices. Winter lay frost on the sill like lace. Bohemond scratched notches under the window, then stopped, counting days' measures loss. He measured habits instead. Which guard missed home when moonlight was thin? Which officer flinched at thunder? Who had debts in dice? When a man sees the web, he begins to see which strands might be cut. Ransom was a word spoken early, then shelved. Danish men lords bargain like wolves testing fences. Sometimes they dangled terms, sometimes they tightened the rope. Bohemond never showed hunger for the bargain. He showed appetite for certainty. Send word? He told a messenger whose eyes would not meet his. Tell them I am alive, and I am learning the price of patience. At night he stood with his cheek against the slit and imagined Antioch's torches, the citadel's sulk. He pictured Tancred walking the walls he had once walked and did not envy. He approved. A prince in chains can still command, if the command is a standard that will not fall. Endure, improve, prepare. When release finally came, it would be to a man made narrower and sharper, like a blade drawn long. On a whetstone, he would not have wasted the years. He would have spent them. When a city loses its center, it either collapses or finds a new spine. Tancred became Antioch's spine. He did not wear Bohemond's shadow. He stood inside it, the way a sword stands inside a scabbard, protected, ready. Morning councils were short. Bread, walls, roads, he would say, tapping the table with a baton wrapped in leather. Everything else waits. He cut patrol routes into the city's day. Gate to quarter, quarter to quay, quay to market, market to monastery. Crossbows watched the citadel like cats at a mouse hole. When the garrison tried a night sortie, it found lanterns hooded to blind and caltrops underfoot like iron stars. After that the fortress hissed but bit less often. Rumor tested him. A Greek priest murmured of a Byzantine envoy sniffing. sniffing at posterns. Tancred invited the priest to dinner, sat him beside the Armenian bishop, and asked them both to bless the same loaf. He reinforced the hinges the same night. A Syrian guild complained of gifts demanded. At the river gate, Tancred stripped to our guards in public and replaced them with men from a different quarter, telling both sides the same sentence. Your honor sits in that gatehouse. Honor, like fear, can be fed beyond the walls, the edges frayed. Horse archers from Aleppo teased the roads. Bandits taxed caravans with knives. Tancred rode light and used the city like a shield. He would dash out, strike, and vanish, letting the enemy find only walls for their temper. Once, near Harim, he drove raiders into a wheat stubble and let the fields burn behind them, smoke, writing a lesson across the sky. The prince's arm is longer than you think. Supply mattered more than stories. He bargained with Armenian hillmen for timber. He reopened a quarry. He paid a mason to teach 6 apprentices, and paid the apprentices to teach 6 more. He set a rule that markets would open at dawn, no matter the news from the plain. Panic learns hours. So must calm. At night he wrote to the west, in a hand less elegant than Bohemond's but franker. Come, there is work and land. There is danger and coin. He signed his own name, not as prince, but as captain who meant to keep what he had been given. Men respect a title. They follow a tone. He walked the ramparts often, not to look heroic, but to check ropes and bolts and the eyes of sentries. Once, a boy nodded off on the wall with frost in his lashes. Tancred draped his own cloak around the boy's shoulders and put him on latrine duty for a month. Both gestures traveled the city faster than any trumpet. He missed Bohemond without making poetry of it. When word came by whisper that the prince lived, Tancred allowed himself one breath that shook, then folded the news into his posture. A steward holds for a day. A good steward holds for a season. A great one holds, until holding becomes building. Tancred built. But ransom, when it came, did not come as a trumpet. It came as numbers, chests of coin from Antioch's merchants, pledges from Latin lords, a necklace broken into links, because gold melts into freedom better when it is counted. The Danishman lord watched with the calm of a man who knows the price of everything. He is worth this, he said, tapping a ledger with a finger like a hammer, and the fear you will feel if he rides at you again. Pew. They brought Bohemond into the courtyard, where he had measured shadows for years. The chain fell from his wrists, with a sound that felt like rain. He did not waste breath on curses or gratitude. He exchanged one weight for another, responsibility for iron, and mounted the horse they offered, a bay with a white star, good legs and better manners. Ride him carefully, a groom said, not meeting his eye. Bohemond laughed, a dry sound. I have forgotten how to ride carelessly. The road back tasted of dust and beginning. He rode with a small escort, not wanting to look like a threat before he was a promise fulfilled. Villagers peered from doorways, children shouted a word. Prince! As if testing its shape. At the Orontes he stopped and put his hand in the water. Cold, he said, and Tancred, waiting at the quay, grinned like a boy and a captain at once. They did not embrace in the square, they walked the walls. Tancred's report was simple, the roads held, the citadel sulked, the markets breathed. The men were thin and the discipline thick. Bohemond listened and nodded and corrected 2 small things. Nothing petty, both necessary. You held, he said at last. More than held. Tancred shook his head. Built. For you to stand on, that was the embrace. The city greeted him as it greets rain after drought, with relief that hides its own pride. Bakers hung wreaths of bread on gateposts. A Syrian boy shouted that the prince's beard was ugly. His mother cuffed him, and then bowed 3 times. Bohemond laughed and set policies in the same hour. A new rotation at the riverside gate, a levy for repairing the road to Latakia, a rule that soldiers who drank after watch would work the next morning in the cisterns. At night he sat with his signet in his palm and looked at the letters Tancred had written. He added his own stamp to a few, rewrote others with sharper promises. To the west he sent 2 messages, one that sounded like sanctuary, Antioch is kept, come make lives, and one that sounded like a trumpet, return with lances. There is another account to settle. He walked alone to a tower that looked east. The citadel glowered. The plain, for once, merely lay there, a map with its teeth hidden. You owe me, he told the city softly. It was not a threat. It was a vow to pay the debt with more building. And soon, with a reckoning that had a Greek name, a city can be held by arms. An era is held by marriages. Bohemond sailed west with an escort of veterans, and the smell of Antioch's ovens still in his cloak. The sea was a long drumbeat. When he stepped into France, the air changed. Damp stone, green fields, the noise of courts where men wear velvet over steel and argue with Latin and smiles. He entered halls bright with tapestry and calculation. Kings and counts weighed him as jewelers weigh stones, not only for shine, but for hardness. Rumor walked before him, Antioch taken, siege broken, a prince by consent and by cunning. Women watched a man who had survived hunger and chains. Men watched a commander who had learned to rule. Bohemond spoke little and well. He praised other people's victories first and his own last. He did not beg, he bartered. Constance, daughter of a king, met him in a cathedral light that turned gold into warmth. Her gaze was not timid. It measured as courts, too, but there was curiosity in it, the honest kind. She had been taught to read faces as well as missiles. This one told her a story of cold nights and hot choices. "Will you keep your vows?" she asked, half teasing, half testing. "When they are well made," he said. And the bishop smiled, as if heaven itself had agreed to negotiate. The wedding joined banners as much as hands. Bishops intoned, lords nodded. Minstrels shaped the day into something that would travel on the breath of winter fires. Bohemond did not preen. He stood steady, said words he meant, took the ring without theatrics, and kissed his bride with the gravity of a pact that would move armies. Feasts followed, and recruiting dressed itself as celebration. Between courses, Bohemond slipped terms across tables, land near the Orontes for a season of service, a tower's income for a company pledged, a share in customs for a convoy of masons and millers. He spoke to younger sons with empty purses and to older ones with full but restless. Constance watched with a calm no one mistook for passivity. Twice, she steered a conversation to a man her father preferred, and the man left the table, smiling and indebted. In quieter rooms, maps returned. Bohemond traced Epirus with a fingertip, Dyrrhachium, a memory from his father's wars, and a new target for his own. Old accounts. He told Constance when they walked cloisters that smelled of beeswax and rosemary, a Roman emperor who counted us out of our own victory. She did not chide. She asked for logistics, ships, ports, wintering places. He loved her in that question more than in any compliment. When at last they rode from France with banners that had not flown in the East before, train was not lavish. It was hungry. Steel had been sharpened on vows. Silk had been stitched over. Resolve. Bohemond looked back once at a land that had given him a wife and an army. Then he looked east and felt the old tide take him. The storm he carried would break over a familiar shore. Ships stitched the Adriatic with white scars. Bohemond's new banners snapped above decks, French lilies beside Norman wolves, silk answering salt. The western wind smelled of oak and iron. Men who had only heard of Constantinople spoke its name as if biting a coin to test it. Bohemond stood at the prow and remembered another crossing, another gamble, a different oath. They made landfall on the coast of Epirus, in coves where rock throws back the sea, and villages watched strangers from behind shutters. Bohemond paid for bread and took forage. He wanted fear to run ahead of him, not rage. His target was old and personal, Dyrrhachium, gate of the Balkans, the city his father had clawed at and nearly held. He drew the siege lines, like a man signing his family name. The walls were high, the sea at their back, and the emperor's ships a promise of patience. Bohemond understood the shape of the coming days, not a single blaze, but a slow fire. He built camps with ditches and watchtowers, raised engines from timber, marched down from slopes, set sappers to the roots of towers like woodpeckers at a stubborn tree. He harried the roads to keep relief at arm's length. He sent letters to Scanda, to hill lords whose loyalty could be bought with gold or safety. He salted answers with threats and kindness in the same handful. Alexios Komnenos did not charge. He circled. Imperial fleets pinched the coast. Land columns placed themselves out of reach and out of neglect. A noose, knotted not with rope but with time. Markets that should have fed the besiegers dried. Disease found the places where men slept too close. Rain turned a ramp into a swamp that swallowed a tower's wheel to its axle. Patience is a blade, Bohemond told his captains. He means to cut us without swinging. He tried to break the pattern. Night sorties struck supply depots. A feint near a gate drew defenders onto prepared ground and cost them officers they could not spare. Once, a firepot set a section of wool black, and for a heartbeat, scaling ladders flowered like vines. Then a gust snatched advantage, and the sea threw up spray that killed flame. The ladders fell back like broken ribs. In council, some urged a storm at any cost. Others, withdrawal to fight a war of raids and letters. Bohemond listened to men who had never bled at Antioch talk about glory, and to men who had bled talk about bread. He chose neither desperation nor retreat. He chose endurance, a word he had learned to respect in a cell. We outlast his hope of an easy victory, he said. We make his patience expensive. The emperor's patience was rich. Months stretched. Rain-rotted ropes, sun-warped shields. Priests said masses in mud. Bohemond walked the lines by night and day. The storm inside him, learning a new rhythm, not thunder, but drum. He had come to repay a debt in the currency of crowns. He found himself paying it in hours. The city held, the fleet gleamed, the noose tightened, and somewhere in the quiet, between horncalls, Bohemond began to understand that storms can be turned aside, not by walls alone, but by a wind that will not blow you the last 6 inches. He would need another weapon, one not made of wood or courage. He would need a treaty sharp enough to be a wound. Sieges are clocks, every day a tick, every ration a tock. At Dyrrhachium, the hands turned against Bohemond. The city leaned its back to the Adriatic and drank from imperial ships. When rams crawled forward, stone answered with patience. When sappers gnawed at towers, the ground oozed brine and collapsed their mouths. Above the surf, Byzantine horns taunted in long, mournful notes that sounded like laughter dragged through a shell. Bohemond drew lines, then drew tighter lines. Trenches nested like rings in a tree. Watchfires dotted the hills. Dengenes rolled in reset. He cut the roads and salted them with ambush. taking wagons by night and leaving rumors by day. Yet Alexios's answer was not courage but calculus. The emperor's fleets sealed the coast. His land columns sat just beyond the reach of rashness, thinning supplies, not with raids, but with certainty. Rain turned cordage to ropes of mold. Sun warped the shields as if the wood remembered the forest and wished to be tree again. In council, French newcomers urged a storming. One day of blood, and we dine in the forum. The Normans, who had bled at Antioch, looked at the mud and said nothing. Bohemond listened with a stillness that made talkers lower their voices. "The emperor is using time as a blade," he said at last. "If we rush the edge, we cut ourselves. If we wait, we are shaved bald." He sent riders to bait relief columns, to set fires where the coast road kinked, to snatch prisoners whose answers, under bread and iron, all agreed, "Alexios will not give you a mistake." A storm opened the sea like a wound. For one night the harbor pitched, and the galleys groaned at anchor. Bohemond drove an assault against a seaward wall scabbed by salt. Ladders bit, men climbed. For a heartbeat, the city's breath hitched. Then the wind swung. The rain sheeted sideways. Braziers flared on the parapets, and the defenders threw lime and stones until the ladders fell back like broken ribs. Horses screamed in the swamp where a tower wheel sank to its axle and would not rise again. Engines were covered, fires banked. A truce flag, white as a winter bone, climbed a pole and cracked in the wind. Bohemond watched it strike the sun and did not lower his eyes. Retreat is not surrender. If you carry your knife to the table, parley tents look alike, linen, ropes, guarded courtesy. But their shadows change with history. At Devil, the wind tasted of mountain time and accounted promises. Imperial envoys arrived in purple-edged cloaks, gestures smooth as oil over water. Behind their politeness stood Alexios, invisible but palpable. The way an armory is present, even when the door is shut. They spoke first of oaths, as if the word were a relic. "The emperor offers magnanimity," said the chief envoy, setting tablets on the table as priests muttered and secretaries sharpened quills. "The principality of Antioch shall be recognized as an imperial fief. You, Bohemond, will become the emperor's vassal, swear homage, admit a Greek patriarch, restore coastal towns taken improperly, and receive in return safety, honor, and the emperor's friendship." Bohemond let the list run like beads through a hand. He imagined Antioch hearing each clause and deciding if it sounded like rain or a chain. He countered without heat. Safety is air, friendship is weather. I bargained for stone. He pushed for terms that sounded narrow and proved wide. That Antioch's internal rule would remain his. That imperial garrisons, if admitted at all, would be few and named. That what was restored on parchment could be delayed in practice by necessity. That evergreen clause of the East. The day lengthened into the kind of afternoon where patience becomes an instrument. The emperor's men wanted confession, written in Latin and Greek, stamped in two worlds. Bohemond gave them words, homage, fealty, obedience, and made sure each sat beside a word of his own. Custody, custom, need. When they pressed for a time certain, he offered a time prudent. When they asked for gates, he offered keys for one gate, kept 3 for himself, and made the 4th a chapel door that would stay closed until candles arrived. At last, the documents lay like tamed beasts, a treaty that made the emperor's victory shine in chronicles, and gave Bohemond room to maneuver in life. He knelt, as courtesy requires, and placed his hands between the envoys, speaking the phrases that courtiers would recite, and soldiers would forget when arrows flew. The wolf put on a collar because collars can be cut, Alexios had his parchment. Bohemond had his breathing space. That night, by a small fire outside the tent line, Bohemond warmed his hands and rolled the treaty's shape in his mind. The way a smith rolls metal for temper. He wins ink, he told Constance in a letter he composed and sealed with the wolf's head. We keep streets. If he comes for more than paper, we will speak in the old language. He closed his eyes and saw two cities layered, Constantinople, that cathedral of caution, and Antioch, his rough masterpiece. Between them lay seas, seasons, and now sentences. Sometimes a sentence is a bridge, sometimes it is a blade. He meant to use it as both. The road west felt older than ambition. Italy received Bohemond, with olive smoke and church bells, with the intimacy of stone villages that remember names longer than kings do. He returned not as a conqueror at triumph, but as a man who had traded victories for space. A rarer coin. In Apulia, halls that had once measured him against his father now measured him against his own shadow. He moved through obligations like a general through streets he means to keep. He paid old debts in full view, kissed relics with sincerity. That was not theatre. Judged quarrels over fields as if cities did not hang from his belt. Constance made the halls warm without turning them soft. Her presence stitched French silk to Norman iron. News from the east arrived in waves. Tancred holding the Orontes like a hilt, the citadel still glowering but largely silent, merchants writing that Antioch's baths steamed on feast days. The letters tugged, a river under the boat. He walked the coast at Otranto and watched ships lean toward horizons. I will go back, he told no one aloud. Time answered, with the cough that sometimes bent him double, and left his palms braced on a table. He learned the geometry of limits. Armor felt heavier, stairs multiplied, nights lengthened. Physicians bled him, prayed over him, brewed syrups that tasted of honey and surrender. He drank what courtesy required and then did what will demanded. He planned. Plans took the shape of people. He named Tancred guardian. In all but title, the hand on Antioch's day-to-day until another hand grew large enough to close over the same pommel. He held his infant son. Bohemond again, because some names bind more firmly than oaths, and saw not a soldier but a claim, a promise to a city that eats men as willingly as bread. He left instructions written in a script as straight as a spear, revenues earmarked for walls, marriage terms sketched as if they were siege works, sentences that began with, "If I die," and ended with, "You will." He did not make a shrine of regret. He walked the training yard and corrected a knight's stance with 2 fingers. He visited a mill and paid the mason for a better sluice. He wrote to Rome and Chartres with the same calm, respect paid. Favors asked, the cadence of a man who has learned that victory is the child of patience and pressure. Some evenings he sat with Constance on a balcony where swallows stitched the dusk, and spoke of Antioch as if it were a person they both loved. "Cities are families," she said once. "They quarrel, forgive, forget, remember." He smiled into his cup. "Then we must be the elder cousins who pay for the weddings." When autumn sharpened, he felt the season like a hand on his shoulder. He did not weep for campaigns. He might not lead. He counted those he had, and the city that still wore his habits like a coat. Homeward, yes, but the east hummed in his bones like a remembered drum. Illness is a siege without banners. It came not as a charge, but as a tightening. Breath shortened, nights lengthened, hands sometimes trembling, as if from cold that others did not feel. Bohemond set a schedule against it. The way he had set schedules against hunger at Antioch, hours for counsel, for petitions, for arms drill, for rest that he obeyed like an order rather than a favor. He reviewed ledgers until numbers steadied, He inspected storehouses with the interest of a man who had starved. He had the castle's cistern dredged and roof beams checked, telling the steward, "Walls fail where men forget they are alive." He called Tancred's letters to hand and wrote answers that were not merely encouragement but instruction. Rotate the watch by hourglass. Note son. Post a scribe at each gate to record the names of caravan masters. Teach 3 boys the trade of every man you cannot spare. He wrote as if the parchment were a wall and the ink mortar. He summoned knights and elders to witness dispositions, a trust for the bakeries, a stipend for widows of the garrison, tolls fixed low enough to make long caravans prefer Antioch to any rival. He spoke of his son not as a banner, but as a duty, the child to be taught first to read accounts, and only then to read maps, to be raised among Italians for 10 years and then sent east with tutors who had washed in the Orontes, to know the names of the Armenian wards and the Greek priests, by heart, before he learned the names of his own captains. When fever kept him in bed, he fought it with memory drills, reciting tower names, gate weights, patrol routes, refusing the fog the way he had refused panic at Dorylium. Constance set cool cloths, read letters aloud, corrected a clause, held the line of the household with the composure of a commander who wears silk. He loved her more fiercely then, and more quietly. There were moments when he rose and the old strength answered. On a clear morning he set a lance in the tilt yard, and showed a boy the angle that turns a couch into a lever. At vespers, he stood through the psalm. On a rainy noon, he laughed as a hound stole a loaf from the kitchen and raced a squire around the well. Even sages have sunlight. He made peace with rivals he would not have trusted in youth, sending small gifts that said, "I see the game is larger than the peace." He left 1 letter for Alexios he did not send, 3 plain sentences, acknowledging the emperor's victory on parchment and his own victories in stone. He folded it and put it in a coffer with a lock that bore no key, as if to teach himself that not every word must be uttered to be true. When the fever flared hardest, he asked for a map of Antioch and laid his hand on it, palm over the quarter where he had first rationed bread. "Hold," he whispered, "not to men only, but to the stone that had learned his voice." Then he slept, the sleep of a man who has set every watch he can. After a great bell stops, your ear keeps hearing it. So it was with Bohemond. The day came like a careful footstep. No horns, no suddenness, only the measured departure of a man whose habits had already outlived him. He died as soldiers prefer, with orders given, with the watch set, with love close and noise far. In the weeks that followed, words sorted themselves. Priests called him defender and scourge, according to which altar they faced. Minstrels discovered how easily a night ladder becomes a stanza. Chroniclers argued in margins, oath-breaker or necessity's friend, pirate or prince. The pages kept both, because history loves a riddle better than a verdict. In Antioch, rumors crossed the sea faster than ships. Men at the dog gate remembered a wolf banner that had taught them what a market should cost. Women in the northern quarter remembered a tall foreigner who had walked the ration line, in winter, and made a joke sharp enough to cut hunger for a heartbeat. The citadel, that stubborn tooth, still rose against the sky, but the streets below it bore out his gate. Courts that mixed tongues, patrols at regular hours, prices hammered into fairness by visible hammers. Stone does not praise, but it remembers pressure. Tancred held the city with the steadiness of a man who knows he is an adjective to another man's noun, and is content with the grammar. He read the letters Bohemond had left and turned them into policy and then into custom. That final victory, caravans learned to say Antioch in the same breath as prophet. Enemies learned to say it in the same sentence as patience. Boys on ramparts traced grooves in merlons with the absent fingers of soldiers who had stood there before them and felt part of something longer than a season. In Italy, Constance kept a house where decisiveness was a kind of grace. She told her infant son stories that were half lullaby, half ledger, of chains on rivers and treaties that bit, of men who learned when to kneel because it let them stand longer. She taught him that some crowns are worn on the skull and some in the spine. Years later, when dust settled on other banners and Antioch's alleys learned new names for old fears, travelers still found places where Bohemond's shadow offered shade. A baker's oath by the prince's loaf outlived the baker. A guard's proverb, hold like Bohemond, outlived the guard. In taverns far from the Orontes, a singer could hush a room by beginning. There was a wall and 3 lanterns, and a man too large for his father's land. The chorus did the rest. What did he win? Not a clean legend, better a complicated one, a memory thick enough to shelter argument. He taught stone to keep time with will. He taught men that oaths are tools, and tools are dangerous. He left a city that answered to him even after it had to answer to others. But on some nights the wind off the Orontes still sounds like a chain slipping from a notch. On some mornings the Adriatic looks flat enough to promise a second chance. But history does not grant returns. It grants echoes. Listen, you can still hear them, faint, flint bright, where walls meet the sky,